Picture a wealthy Roman dinner party where guests recline on couches, servants bring out silver platters, and among the exotic delicacies being served are plump roasted rodents, dormice, fattened in special pottery jars and stuffed with pork, pepper and pine nuts, presented as a luxury that only the most sophisticated host could provide. So sit back, grab a cup of tea, and get ready to explore how elite Romans raised and ate dormice as a prized delicacy. Discover why these tiny creatures were considered a status symbol at banquets. Understand how special pottery containers called gliraria were designed to fatten dormice in total darkness, and learn what Roman recipes, sumptuary laws, and archaeological evidence reveal about Roman attitudes toward luxury, status, and the strange lengths to which they would go to impress their dinner guests. The idea of eating dormice might strike modern listeners as bizarre, even revolting. We think of mice and rats as pests, not food. But the Romans saw things differently. To them, the edible dormouse was a delicacy, a luxury item that signaled wealth, sophistication, and culinary refinement. Serving dormice at your dinner party told your guests that you had the resources, the knowledge, and the taste to provide something truly special. It was conspicuous consumption in its most literal form, eating something expensive and unusual simply because you could. The species the Romans ate was not the common house mouse or the small dormouse you might find in a British hedgerow. It was the edible dormouse, known to scientists as glis. This is a substantially larger animal, about the size of a small squirrel, with a bushy tail and soft grey fur. Native to continental Europe, the edible dormouse is nocturnal and spends much of the year in hibernation, building up fat reserves that would prove very attractive to Roman gourmands. The edible dormouse was well suited to farming for several reasons. Its natural tendency to fatten itself before hibernation meant that with the right conditions, it could be encouraged to become very plump indeed. Its relatively large size, compared to other dormice species, meant there was actually something to eat, and its mild temperament made it easier to keep in captivity than more aggressive rodents. The Romans recognized these qualities and developed sophisticated methods for raising dormice as food. The key to Roman dormouse farming was the glirarium, a special container designed specifically for fattening dormice. The word comes from glis, the Latin name for the dormouse. A glirarium could refer to a larger outdoor enclosure, essentially a walled garden where dormice were kept. But the term is most often associated with the distinctive pottery jars that have survived in the archaeological record. These pottery gliraria are fascinating objects. They were typically round or barrel-shaped vessels made of terracotta with several distinctive features. The interior walls had horizontal ridges or shelves moulded into them, creating ledges for the dormice to climb and rest on. Small holes pierced the walls for ventilation. Dormice need fresh air even in confinement, and there were openings through which food could be introduced without letting the dormice escape. The most important feature of the glirarium was that it kept the dormice in complete darkness. This was not cruelty for its own sake, but a calculated strategy to maximize fattening. Dormice are nocturnal animals that become active in darkness and sleep during the day. By keeping them in perpetual darkness, the Romans disrupted their natural rhythms. The dormice would eat more and move less, believing it was always night, always time to feed. The result was rapid weight gain, exactly what the Romans wanted. The diet fed to dormice in gliraria was carefully chosen to promote fattening. Varro, the Roman agricultural writer, tells us that dormice were fed on acorns, chestnuts, and walnuts, all high-fat foods that would help the animals pack on weight. Other sources mention beech nuts and various other nuts. The goal was to provide calorie-dense food that the dormice would consume in large quantities, converting it into the tender, fatty flesh that Roman diners prized. The fattening process took several weeks, during which the dormice would be regularly fed through the openings in the glirarium. Servants would check on them, adding fresh nuts and removing waste. The pottery jar was essentially a feeding chamber, a controlled environment designed for one purpose, producing the fattest possible dormice for the table. Archaeological evidence for gliraria comes primarily from Pompeii and other sites around the Bay of Naples, though examples have been found elsewhere in the Roman world. The Pompeian gliraria are particularly well preserved, allowing us to see exactly how these vessels were constructed. They typically stand about a foot tall, with thick walls and the characteristic internal ridges. Some have lids that could be secured to prevent escape. Looking at these objects in museum displays, you can almost imagine the dormice climbing the interior ledges, eating their fill of acorns, growing fat in the darkness. The survival of these gliraria tells us that dormouse farming was a real and widespread practice, not just a literary exaggeration. When ancient authors describe Romans eating dormice, we can point to the physical evidence that confirms their accounts. The gliraria are tangible proof of Roman culinary practices that might otherwise seem too strange to believe. Once the dormice were sufficiently fattened, they were ready for the kitchen. The most famous source for Roman dormouse recipes is the cookbook attributed to Apicius, a collection of recipes compiled sometime in the late Roman Empire. The Apicius cookbook includes a recipe for stuffed dormice that gives us a detailed picture of how this delicacy was prepared. According to Apicius, dormice were stuffed with a mixture of pork, pepper, pine nuts, and garum, the ubiquitous Roman fish sauce that appeared in almost every dish. The stuffed dormice were then sewn shut and either roasted in a clay oven or cooked on a tile. The recipe calls for the dormice to be arranged on the cooking surface and placed over heat until done. The result would have been small, rich parcels of meat, crispy on the outside and succulent within. The ingredients in the stuffing tell us something about Roman culinary values. Pork was the most common meat in Roman cooking, and adding it to the dormice would have extended the dish and made it more substantial. Pepper was an expensive imported spice, a luxury ingredient that signalled the host's wealth. Pine nuts added texture and their own distinctive flavour, and garum, that fermented fish sauce that Romans put on everything, would have added the savoury umami depth that Romans loved. The preparation of stuffed dormice was not simple home cooking. It required skill, expensive ingredients, and the specialised knowledge of how to handle these unusual animals. A host who served stuffed dormice was demonstrating not just wealth but culinary sophistication. The dish was a performance as much as a meal. Dormice were typically served at Roman dinner parties, the convivium as the Romans called it. The convivium was far more than just a meal. It was a social institution, a carefully choreographed event where Romans displayed their status, cultivated relationships, and competed with their peers. The food served at a convivium was a crucial element of this social theatre, and exotic dishes like dormice played an important role. A formal Roman dinner had multiple courses, beginning with the gustatio or appetizer course, proceeding through the main courses, and concluding with dessert. Dormice might appear in the gustatio, served as a special treat to whet the appetite and impress guests from the start, or they might be presented as a highlight of the meal, brought out with ceremony to gasps of appreciation from the diners. The social dynamics of the convivium meant that hosts were always looking for ways to outdo each other. If your rival served peacock, you served flamingo. If he served flamingo, you served something even more exotic. Dormice fit perfectly into this competitive dining culture. They were unusual enough to attract attention, expensive enough to signal wealth, and difficult enough to prepare that they demonstrated the host's command of culinary resources. The most famous literary depiction of Roman excess at the dinner table comes from Petronius's Satyricon, a satirical novel from the 1st century CE. The centerpiece of the surviving text is the Cena Trimalchionis, Trimalchio's dinner, a grotesque parody of nouveau riche excess. Trimalchio, a wealthy freedman, hosts a dinner party where the food is designed entirely for show, with dish after dish of elaborate, ridiculous creations meant to impress and astonish. While dormice don't feature prominently in Trimalchio's feast, the spirit of competitive excess that Petronius mocks is exactly the culture that made dormice popular. Roman elites, and those who aspired to elite status, were locked in an endless competition of display, and food was one of the primary arenas for this competition. The dormouse, fattened in its dark jar and stuffed with expensive ingredients, was a small but significant weapon in this culinary arms race. Not everyone approved of this culture of excess. Roman moralists regularly complained about the degeneracy of contemporary dining, contrasting the simple meals of virtuous ancestors with the elaborate banquets of their own corrupt age. This moral concern found legal expression in the sumptuary laws, regulations designed to limit spending on luxury goods, including food. The Lex Fania, passed in 161 BCE, was one of the earliest and most famous of these laws. It limited the amount that could be spent on banquets and restricted certain luxury foods. Later laws followed, each attempting to curb what legislators saw as dangerous excess. Remarkably, dormice were specifically mentioned in some of these regulations, singled out alongside other luxury items as foods that needed to be controlled. The fact that lawmakers bothered to mention dormice specifically tells us two things. First, dormice were common enough at elite tables that they attracted legislative attention. Second, they were expensive enough to be considered a marker of the kind of excess that sumptuary laws targeted. The dormouse had become a symbol of luxury dining, important enough to regulate. Of course, sumptuary laws were notoriously difficult to enforce. Wealthy Romans found ways around them, and the laws were repeatedly revised and reissued, suggesting that they were not particularly effective. The appetite for luxury foods like dormice continued despite legal restrictions. Status competition proved stronger than legislative disapproval. The broader context of Roman dormouse eating was a culture that valued exotic and unusual foods as markers of sophistication. The Roman elite diet included many items that would strike modern eaters as strange: flamingo tongues, peacock brains, sow's udders, sea urchins, and countless other delicacies. Dormice were part of this larger pattern, the pursuit of the rare, the expensive, and the impressive. This pursuit of exotic foods was connected to Rome's imperial expansion. As Rome conquered the Mediterranean world and beyond, it gained access to ingredients and culinary traditions from across 3 continents. Spices from India, silphium from North Africa, oysters from Britain, all flowed into Rome to satisfy elite appetites. The Roman dinner table became a display of imperial reach, a place where the wealth of the world was consumed. Dormice, unlike many exotic foods, were not imported from distant lands. They were native to Italy and could be raised locally. But the effort required to farm them, the specialized equipment needed, and the culinary skill required to prepare them properly, all contributed to their status as a luxury item. You didn't need to import dormice from the ends of the earth, but you did need resources and knowledge to serve them well. The practice of raising dormice for food was not unique to the Romans. Evidence suggests that various Mediterranean peoples ate dormice, and the practice may have predated Roman civilization. But the Romans developed it to a high art, creating specialized equipment and recipes that elevated dormouse eating from simple foraging to sophisticated gastronomy. Varro, writing in the 1st century BCE, provides our most detailed ancient account of dormouse husbandry. In his agricultural treatise De Re Rustica, he describes how dormice could be raised in enclosed areas, gliraria in the broader sense, where oak and beech trees provided natural food. He also mentions the pottery jars used for final fattening. Varro treats dormouse farming as a normal part of Roman agriculture, one of many ways that a wealthy landowner could profit from his estate. The scale of dormouse production is difficult to estimate, but it was clearly substantial enough to supply the tables of the Roman elite. Wealthy households might have their own gliraria, raising dormice on their country estates. There was probably also a commercial market, with dormice sold to those who wanted to serve them but didn't raise their own. The infrastructure for dormouse production was part of the broader Roman food system. What did dormice actually taste like? Ancient sources are not particularly detailed on this point, but we can make some educated guesses. The flesh of a fattened dormouse would have been tender and rich, with a high fat content that would have made it succulent and flavorful. The taste was probably somewhere between chicken and rabbit, mild but distinctive, enhanced by whatever seasonings and stuffings were used in preparation. Modern accounts from regions where dormouse eating has survived, parts of Slovenia and Croatia, for example, describe the meat as tender and slightly sweet, with a texture similar to squirrel or rabbit. These contemporary descriptions may give us some sense of what Roman diners experienced, though of course the preparation methods and accompanying flavours would have been quite different. The presentation of dormice at Roman banquets would have been as important as the taste. Roman dining was highly visual, with elaborate presentations designed to impress and surprise. Dormice might have been arranged artfully on silver platters, garnished with herbs and sauces, presented with ceremony by trained servants. The visual impact was part of the experience, contributing to the overall impression of luxury and sophistication. The decline of dormouse eating in the Roman world is difficult to date precisely, but it was probably connected to broader changes in Roman culture and society. As Christianity became the dominant religion of the empire, attitudes toward luxury and excess changed. Christian moralists condemned the elaborate banquets of pagan Rome, advocating for simpler, more modest meals. The culture of competitive dining that had made dormice popular gradually faded. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE disrupted the economic and social structures that had supported elite dining. The wealthy villas where dormice had been raised fell into ruin. The trade networks that had supplied exotic ingredients collapsed. The culinary knowledge that had been passed down through generations of cooks was lost. Dormouse eating survived in some regions, but it was no longer the widespread practice it had been in the Roman heyday. In some parts of Europe, the tradition of eating dormice has persisted into modern times. Slovenia and Croatia, in particular, have maintained dormouse hunting and eating as a folk tradition. In these regions, dormice are typically trapped in the wild rather than farmed, and they are prepared in various ways: roasted, stewed, or fried. These modern practices are probably descended from ancient traditions, though they have evolved considerably over the centuries. Today, the edible dormouse is a protected species in many European countries, and hunting or eating them is illegal. Conservation concerns have ended what was once a widespread culinary practice. The dormouse has gone from delicacy to protected wildlife, a remarkable transformation in its relationship with humans. The archaeological evidence for Roman dormouse farming continues to accumulate. New discoveries of gliraria at Roman sites confirm the widespread nature of the practice. Museum collections around the world include examples of these distinctive vessels, allowing visitors to see the physical evidence of this unusual aspect of Roman life. Each glirarium is a small window into Roman culture, a tangible connection to the dinner parties of 2,000 years ago. What does the Roman practice of eating dormice teach us about Roman culture more broadly? Several things stand out. First, it shows us the importance of status competition in Roman elite society. Romans were constantly seeking ways to distinguish themselves from their peers to demonstrate their wealth and sophistication. Food was a crucial arena for this competition, and unusual items like dormice were valued precisely because they were expensive and impressive. The dormouse on the silver platter was a statement about the host's place in Roman society. Second, it shows us Roman attitudes toward nature and animals. The Romans had no concept of animal welfare in the modern sense. Animals existed to serve human needs, whether for food, labour, entertainment, or sacrifice. The dormouse, fattened in darkness, fed until it could barely move, was simply a resource to be exploited. This instrumental view of animals was typical of ancient societies and persisted in Western culture for many centuries. Third, it shows us the sophistication of Roman food production. The glirarium was a specialized piece of technology, designed for a specific purpose and refined over generations. Roman agriculture and food production involved many such specialized techniques and tools, representing a level of sophistication that would not be matched in Europe for many centuries after Rome's fall. Fourth, it shows us the tension in Roman culture between luxury and morality. Romans simultaneously celebrated and condemned excess. They created elaborate banquets and then passed laws trying to restrict them. They ate dormice and then worried about what this said about their moral character. This ambivalence about luxury was a persistent feature of Roman culture, never fully resolved. Fifth, it shows us how food practices can serve as markers of cultural identity. Eating dormice was a distinctively Roman practice, part of what it meant to participate in Roman elite culture. When Romans spread across the Mediterranean, they brought their food practices with them, including dormouse farming. The gliraria found in Roman Britain or Roman Spain are evidence of cultural transmission, of Romans recreating their homeland's customs in distant provinces. The dormouse, small and seemingly insignificant, thus opens a window onto large questions about Roman society, how Romans thought about status and competition, how they related to the natural world, how they organized their food systems, how they balanced pleasure and morality, and how they defined themselves as a culture. The humble glirarium, sitting in a museum case, contains multitudes. For modern observers, the Roman practice of eating dormice can seem alien and off-putting. We don't eat rodents, and the idea of fattening small animals in dark jars for our tables violates our sensibilities about animal welfare. But this very strangeness makes the practice valuable for understanding the past. It reminds us that other cultures have had very different relationships with food and animals, that what seems natural and obvious to us is often culturally specific and historically contingent. The Romans who raised and ate dormice were not monsters or degenerates. They were people operating within their own cultural framework, following practices that their society considered normal and even admirable. Understanding those practices on their own terms, without imposing our own values, is essential for genuine historical understanding. The dormouse challenges us to see the past as truly foreign, truly different from our own experience. At the same time, the dormouse connects us to concerns that remain relevant today. The tension between luxury and morality, the use of food as status display, the exploitation of animals for human pleasure, these are not uniquely Roman concerns. We may not eat dormice, but we have our own luxury foods, our own status competitions, our own complicated relationships with the animals we consume. The Roman dinner party, with its stuffed dormice and competitive excess, is not as far from our own experience as we might like to think. The next time you see a picture of a Roman banquet, or read about the exotic foods of ancient Rome, remember the dormouse. Remember the pottery jar where it was fattened, the kitchen where it was stuffed, the silver platter where it was served. Remember the guests who exclaimed over it, the host who preened at their appreciation, the slaves who prepared and served it. Remember the moralists who condemned it, and the lawmakers who tried to ban it. The dormouse was a small creature, but it carried a heavy load of cultural meaning. In its brief journey from glirarium to dinner table, it embodied much of what made Roman elite culture distinctive, and much of what makes it still fascinating to us today. The gliraria sit in museums now, empty and silent, their dormice long gone. But they still have stories to tell. They speak of Roman ingenuity and Roman excess, of the lengths to which people will go to impress their neighbours, of the strange and wonderful diversity of human foodways. The Roman dormouse may be gone, but its legacy endures, in archaeological collections, in ancient texts, and in our enduring fascination with the peculiar eating habits of the ancient world.